Today's story, Adrift in Love. It all started with that unexpected email. Coupon flashing on your computer screen, announcing that you've won a luxury cruise trip. Just imagine, an opportunity that we only see on film. You know? Jean-Pierre, the typical French lover of wine and fine restaurants, was ecstatic. Marianne, his wife, a woman with green eyes and red hair, could not believe her luck. After all, who does not dream of sailing through the waters of the Mediterranean, making stops on paradise islands? Soon, the couple found themselves packing their bags, excited about the idea of escaping the routine in Paris. Jean-Pierre was especially anxious. "Love, I'm going to take the time to relax, bet a little in the ship's casinos. You know how it is, just to relax," he said, as he put his best suits in his suitcase. Marianne just smiled, believing that this would be the trip that would rekindle the passion between them. Except, right? Life has that. As the days passed and the ship followed its route, Jean-Pierre's behavior changed. He spends hours and hours in the casino, fascinated by the sound of the chips, the roulette wheels spinning, the cards being dealt. For him, that environment was paradise. For Marianne, it began to become hell. While Jean-Pierre was lost in gambling, Marianne, who had always dreamed of romantic candlelight dinners and dances under the moonlight, felt more and more alone. She walked alone on the decks of the ship, watching couples in love, feeling the sea breeze on her face, and wondered where she ended up with that kind husband who promised that this would be the trip of dreams. That night, while Jean-Pierre was once again holed up in the casino, Marianne decided to leave the room alone. She put on that blue dress he loved and went to the bar. He sat down, ordered a martini, and stood there, thoughtful. That's when he showed up. Pierre, Frenchman with strong features, piercing gaze, and who, unlike Jean-Pierre, seemed to be more interested in the people around him than in roulettes. So, you can imagine, right? Pierre struck up a casual conversation, complimenting the dress, asking if he was alone. Marianne, needy and disillusioned, felt enveloped by this mysterious man who seemed to be in the same sensation as her. The conversation was fluid, and before she knew it, she was laughing and feeling alive again. The nights on the cruise were becoming something of a bitter routine for Marianne. Jean-Pierre, obsessed with gambling, grew more and more distant, while Pierre, with his warm presence, subtly approached, filling the void that her husband had left. Marianne didn't know what to think anymore. He was there, torn between guilt for letting himself go and the loneliness that insisted on squeezing his heart. One sunny afternoon, during one of the climbs on the charming island of Santorini, Pierre called her to a walk. Jean-Pierre, as usual, was busy in the casino, confirming that the species would soon change in his favor. Marianne, who initially hesitated, eventually accepted the invitation. After all, what harm could there be in exploring the island alongside someone who really seemed to care about it? And there they went. They climbed the hills of Santorini, explored the little white houses with blue roofs, took photos that captured the beauty of the place, but also the connection that began to form between them. The sun set dazzlingly, and Pierre, in a spontaneous gesture, held Marianne's hand. She, surprisingly, did not withdraw it. She felt alive again, as if for a brief moment she had found something she had long lost. However, the weight of reality soon fell on his shoulders. Marianne knew she was getting too involved, that it wasn't right. But how to resist? Pierre was everything Jean-Pierre had ceased to be. Gentle, present, caring. And that evening, back on the ship, after another betting session, Jean-Pierre noticed that something had changed in Marianne. She was different, distant, and it bothered him. "You look strange," he remarked as he prepared to sleep. "Are you mad at me?" Marianne, feeling guilty, shook her head and tried to disguise it. "It's nothing, just fatigue. Tomorrow will be better." But the truth is, she didn't know how long she could sustain that lie. With each meeting with Pierre, her heart becomes more confused. Deep down, she knew she was crossing a line of no return. The next evening, Pierre was invited to dinner at the ship's most upscale restaurant. Jean-Pierre, once again, was lost between the chips and the promises of wealth. Marianne hesitated, but eventually gave in. She dressed carefully, putting on the same blue dress she had worn the first time they talked. When she met him at the restaurant, she was greeted with a smile that made her forget, for an instant, all the confusion that her life was becoming. The dinner was impeccable. Pierre made her laugh, brought up memories she didn't even know she still had, and for a few hours, Marianne forgot everything. However, by the end of the night, when Pierre took her to one of the most isolated decks of the ship, the tension between them was palpable. He moved in, and before she could think, kiss. It was an intense kiss, full of repressed feeling. Marianne felt the ground slip away from her feet as if she were adrift on the sea, not knowing which way to go. But soon after the kiss, guilt flooded her. She slowed down sharply, frightened by what she had just done. "Pierre, I'm married," she whispered, in a tremendous voice. Pierre, with that understanding and warm look, held her hands and replied, "I know, Marianne, but are you happy? Because from what I can see, it doesn't look like it." She was silent, not knowing what meant to answer. In fact, she hadn't really felt happy with Jean-Pierre in a while. But was this justified, or what was I doing? Guilt and desire were conflicted within her, and for once, Marianne saw that she would need to make a choice. First choice that would change everything. That night, Marianne could barely sleep. Pierre's kiss continued to echo in her mind, further confusing her feelings. Jean-Pierre, on the other hand, fell asleep quickly, as if nothing had changed, completely oblivious to the turmoil that was going on in his wife's heart. The next day, the ship made a stop in the sunny city of Nice, on the Côte d'Azur. It was one of the most anticipated destinations of the cruise, with its stunning beaches and its charming historic streets. Marianne saw there an opportunity to step back, think clearly. She decided to spend the day alone, telling Jean-Pierre that she wanted to explore the city on her own. He once again offers without question, eager to return to the casino. While walking through the streets of Nice, Marianne felt in a real dilemma. On the one hand, the memory of Jean-Pierre in the times of dating, the man with whom she fell in love, made her question whether she was really willing to risk everything. On the other hand, Pierre had awakened in her long dormant feelings that she lost, that she would never experience again. That in a cafe overlooking the sea, watching the waves gently breaking on the sand. While drinking coffee, his mind was racing. "What do I do?" she thought. "Should I follow my heart and risk losing everything? Or should I try to save my marriage, even if it means staying unhappy?" It was then, as if fate was playing with her, Pierre appeared. He looked surprised to see her there, but he didn't let the opportunity pass. He sat next to her, a smile on his face. "Marianne, what are you doing alone?" She hesitated before answering. "Only just thinking about life, you know? Trying to understand what I really want." Pierre watched her for a moment, with that look that seemed to see through her. "I know it's hard, but you don't have to face it alone," he said, placing his hand gently on her. Pierre's touch made Marianne shudder. It was as if he had the ability to laugh at all his uncertainties, but at the same time she knew it wasn't right. She stood up abruptly, pulling her hand back. "Pierre, I can't do this. I have to think it's not right." Pierre also declared himself, without losing his cool. "I understand, Marianne, and I won't start you, but know that I'll be here, waiting if you decide you want something more." These words were hammering in Marianne's head all day. She continued to walk the streets of Nice, but now with the weight of the decision I needed to make. Deep down, she knew Pierre was right. Jean-Pierre had changed, and she didn't know if that love still existed. What if she was making a mistake? Back on the ship, Marianne tried to hold a serious conversation with Jean-Pierre. She wanted to know if there was still a chance for them. He was willing to change. But Jean-Pierre, trapped in his own world, did not detect the gravity of the situation. "Honey, can we talk about this later? I'm almost getting back what I lost in the casino," he said, without even looking at her. That was a drop in the bucket for Marianne. She felt invisible, as if she no longer mattered to Jean-Pierre. That night, as he once again sank into gambling, Marianne made the decision to change everything. She went to the deck where she had kissed Pierre, and to her surprise, he was there, as if he knew she was coming. "Pierre, I can't take it anymore," she said, tears in her eyes. "I don't know what to do, but I know I can't go on like this." Pierre hugged her, comforting her. "You don't have to decide anything now, Marianne. Just know that I am here, and that you deserve to be happy." At that moment, something changed inside Marianne. She saw that, as much as she loved Jean-Pierre, the man she had married no longer existed. All that was left was a gambling addict, oblivious to her feelings. She knew it was time to move on, even if it meant leaving behind everything she knew. The next morning, Marianne agreed with a clear explanation she had not felt for some time. The weight of indecision seemed to have dissipated, leaving room for something new, perhaps even frightening, but definitely liberating. Jean-Pierre, on the other hand, came to the room late at night, exhausted and in a bad mood. The species was not on his side, and he was beginning to feel the bitter taste of defeat. But not only in the game. Marianne decided that I needed to talk to him, confront him with the reality that was before them. After breakfast, in one of the ship's elegant restaurants, she called him in for a chat. "Jean, we need to talk. Really, no distractions," she said, her voice firm but full of feeling. Jean-Pierre, noticing the seriousness in her gaze, finally arrived. "All right, Marianne, let's chat." They sat in a quiet area of the deck, where the sea breeze brought some peace, contrasting with the storm that was brewing. Marianne began to speak, opening her heart as she had not done for a long time. "Jean, we won this trip to reconnect, find ourselves again, but all I feel is that we are losing ourselves even more. Feel alone, ignored, and miss the man you were." Jean-Pierre was silent, feeling the weight of Marianne's words. I knew deep down that she was right. He allowed himself to be consumed by gambling, believing that it would bring an emotion that he no longer felt in everyday life. But listening to Marianne, I discovered that I was about to lose something much more valuable. "Marianne, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you," he finally replied, with an honesty that surprised even himself. She looked at him with a mixture of pain and hope in her eyes. "Jean, I don't know if we still have an agreement. I wanted to believe that we can go back to being what we were. I don't know if that's possible." Jean-Pierre took a deep breath, feeling a guilt he had never experienced. He saw that he was so focused on chasing a winning feeling in the betting that he had forgotten the importance of his own wife. "I don't want to lose you, Marianne. I'll do whatever it takes to renew things between us," promised, with a determination he hasn't felt in a while. Marianne wasn't so sure. Despite Jean-Pierre's words, she knew that actions speak louder than promises. Still, a part of her wanted to believe he could change, that maybe there was still a chance for them. Over the next few days, Jean-Pierre really tried hard. He began to spend less time in the casino and more time with Marianne. They explored together the cities in which the ship docked, rediscovering small joys and trying to reconnect. But Pierre's shadow still hung over Marianne. He was always around, always available, and that left a constant conflict. Marianne felt that Pierre represented the freedom, passion, and new life she longed for, while Jean-Pierre represented the safety, comfort, and past she couldn't completely let go of. She found herself in a real dilemma, torn between two options, not knowing which was right. It was during a climb in Marseille that everything came to a breaking point. Jean-Pierre, sensing that he was losing Marianne to someone he didn't even know, confronted her. "Marianne, what's going on between us? I know there's something wrong. If it's someone else, I want to know." She hesitated, but knew that lying would only prolong the suffering. "Jean, there is someone, yes, but I don't know what that means. I feel so confused. I feel like you left me alone for so long, and now I can't turn back." Jean-Pierre suffered a shock, unable to process her words immediately. The silence between them was heavy, charged with suppressed emotions. When he finally spoke, his voice was a broken whisper. "I knew something was wrong, but I never thought it was so serious." Marianne looked at him, feeling a deep pain in her heart. She still cared for Jean-Pierre, but at the same time felt that he had allowed the distance between them became unbearable. "Jean, I didn't want it to be like this. I didn't mean to hurt you." Jean-Pierre, feeling helpless, simply nodded. "I know, Marianne, but I can't fight for us alone." Those words echoed in Marianne's mind. Was she willing to fight for the marriage? Or was it time to move on, even if it meant leaving everything behind? The answer still seemed distant. But one thing was certain, the decision they would make in the coming days would forever change their lives. The days on the cruise dragged on like an emotional whirlwind for Marianne. She was in the eye of the hurricane, not knowing which way to go, feeling the weight of her choices in every second. Jean-Pierre, though struggling to reconnect with her, seemed increasingly distant, as if he had already accepted that things were beyond his control. The tension between the two was palpable, as if they were both on the edge of a precipice, waiting to see who would take the next step. One evening, while the ship was quietly sailing through the Mediterranean Sea, there was a big costume party on board. Marianne, who would love events like this, felt strangely apathetic. But knowing that avoiding socialization would only make the situation worse, she decided to participate. She dressed like an elegant Renaissance lady, with a long dress and a golden mask that covered half of her face. Jean-Pierre, always a fan of adventures, takes on the role of musketeer. When they descended into the main hall, the atmosphere was enveloped in a mixture of colorful lights, laughter, and lively music. It seemed that everyone on the ship was there, living what was supposed to be an unforgettable night. But for Marianne, the feeling was that he was living a nightmare, disguised as a party. He felt suffocated, as if she was being watched, even in the midst of the masked crowd. While Jean-Pierre chatted with other passengers, Marianne lingered, looking for some trouble on the outer deck, where the sea breeze brought some clarity to her thoughts. She leaned against the rail, looking at the horizon, where the sea and sky stood in an almost invisible line. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost did not notice when Pierre moved. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly, without scaring her. Marianne turned to him, surprised, but somehow already waiting for him to appear. "I need some air," he replied, trying to hide the whirlwind of emotions he felt at the sight of him. Pierre, dressed as a mysterious knight, moved closer, his piercing gaze piercing through Marianne's mask. "Are you okay?" Seems distant. Marianne sighed. "I don't know what I'm feeling anymore, Pierre. Everything is so confusing." He watched her for a moment before speaking. "Marianne, I know I can't ask for nothing, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. I don't want to pressure you, but if you decide you want something more, I'll be here." These words, spoken so sincerely, shook Marianne even more. She knew that there was something in Pierre that attracted her, something she could no longer find in Jean-Pierre. But I also knew that the decision was not simple, that there was a lot at stake. Before I could answer, Jean-Pierre appeared. As if sensing something was wrong, he saw Pierre next to Marianne. Even without knowing exactly what was between them, he felt a lump in his stomach. "What's going on here?" he said in a voice of suspicion. Marianne turned around, trying to deceive the situation. "John, I just need some time to think. Pierre showed up here, and we were talking." Jean-Pierre looked at her, then at Pierre, and his gaze endured. "Talking? Is that right, Marianne?" Marianne felt her heart race. She knew that she could not continue with that situation, that she would need to be honest with both of them, but especially with herself. "Jean, I don't know how I feel anymore. I'm confused. I love you, but I also have feelings for Pierre that I can't ignore." The silence that ensued was reassuring. Jean-Pierre appeared to have been punched in the stomach. He took a deep breath, trying to process what he had just heard. "So that's it? Do you want to stay with him?" Marianne shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's not that simple, Jean. I don't want to hurt you, but I also can't go on living like this, feeling incomplete." Pierre, realizing the seriousness of the situation, took a step back. "I don't want to cause trouble. If you decide to stay with John, I will understand." But Jean-Pierre, now overcome by anger and grief, stepped forward, cornering Pierre against the rail. "Do you think you can just show up and destroy my marriage? Who do you think you are?" Marianne, in a panic, rushed to intervene. "Jean, please stop. That won't solve anything." But before she could do anything, the ship gave a slight jolt, causing Pierre to lose his balance. He held on to the rail, but the force of Jean-Pierre's push was enough for him to stumble, and in the blink of an eye, fall into the sea. Marianne's scream echoed across the deck, while Jean-Pierre, horrified by what he had done, ran to try to save him. But Pierre was already in the water, being carried away by the dark waves of the Mediterranean. The crew quickly set off alarms and began a frantic search, but the night was dark, and the chances of finding Pierre were minimal. Marianne, in despair, looked out to sea, hoping to see some sign of Pierre. but all she saw was the dark, unforgiving immensity. She felt responsible, as if her indecisions led to that tragic end. Jean-Pierre, in a state of shock, could not believe what he had done. Anger, jealousy, and pain brought him to a point of no return. Now all that was left was the overwhelming guilt. The dark night in the Mediterranean seemed endless. The ship had stopped, and the crew, along with the passengers, were in a state of shock as the search for Pierre continued. The feeling of despair was palpable, especially for Marianne, who was paralyzed, watching the darkness of the sea, hoping, praying that Pierre would be found. Jean-Pierre, still in a state of shock, was taken to a secluded area of the ship by some crew members who tried to calm him down. He couldn't stop shaking, the image of Pierre falling into the sea repeating in his mind like an endless nightmare. He felt guilty, as if the whole weight of the world was on his shoulders. How did he get to this point? How did anger and jealousy dominate reason? Marianne, in turn, was devastated. Fear is the fault of consuming from the inside. She knew that her actions, her indecision, contributed to the tragedy. She wanted to run to Jean-Pierre, hug him, and say that everything would be fine. But she knew that she could not. She herself no longer believed in it. The hours passed slowly, and with dawn, the search for Pierre was finally ended. Hopes of finding him alive disappeared along with the stars of the previous night. Marianne, devastated, could hardly believe Pierre was gone. He was a soul that brought an unexpected glow into your life, and now he's gone forever. The pain was unbearable, a void that nothing seemed to be able to fill. Jean-Pierre was also in pieces. The weight of guilt crushed him, and he knew he could never undo what had happened. Marianne, whom he loved more than anything, now looked at him with a deep sadness that he knew was partly his fault. The next few days on the cruise were a blur for both of them. They barely talked to each other, wrapped in their own pain. Marianne was stuck in a cycle of regret, wondering how things had come so long ago. Jean-Pierre, on the other hand, was sunk in a deep depression, feeling that he had destroyed everything that mattered in his life. When the cruise finally reached its final destination, Marianne and Jean-Pierre disembarked as two completely different people from the ones they had boarded. Marianne decided that she needed time and space to process everything that had happened. She did not know if there was still a future for her and Jean-Pierre. She knew that she could not continue as she was. She said goodbye to him with tears in her eyes and took a flight back to Paris, alone. Jean-Pierre stayed behind, feeling more alone than never. He knew he had lost Marianne, but he also knew he had lost a part of himself that fateful night. Without her, he didn't know what to do, but he also knew he couldn't follow her now. He will likely reunite in some form before attempting to reclaim what was left of his marriage. The months that followed were difficult for both of them. Marianne threw herself into her work, trying to bury the pain and guilt, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of Pierre, the man she could have loved but who never had a chance. Jean-Pierre withdrew from everyone, isolating himself, trying to find some kind of redemption in his suffering. Eventually, they met again in a small coffee shop in Paris, where it all began. They sat in silence, each waiting for the other to speak first. It was Jean-Pierre who courted silence, his voice still marked by pain and regret. "Marianne, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I did. For what happened to Pierre, for leaving you alone. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I am deeply sorry." Marianne, her eyes filled with tears, nodded. "I'm sorry too, Jean. I have my share of blame for all this too. But I think we both need to move on somehow. We must forgive ourselves if we are ever to find peace." They looked at each other for a long time, and at that moment, something changed. It was not a reconciliation, but perhaps an understanding. An ease that they had both changed forever, and that their future, together or apart, depended on their ability to both learn and grow from what had happened. They decided it was best to go their separate ways. It was not an easy decision, but it was necessary. The cruise, which was supposed to be a renovation, eventually became a full stop. But in that moment, they knew it was the right thing to do. Marianne left the coffee shop feeling a strange sense of rupture, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Jean-Pierre stayed behind, watching her leave, knowing that this was the last time he would see her like that. And so their lives went on, forever scarred by tragedy, but with the hope that somehow they might find the peace they so desperately sought. It's been a year in the past since Marianne and Jean-Pierre split up in a small coffee shop in Paris. Although they both went their separate ways, the fateful memory of the cruise trip continued to echo in their lives in an unexpected way. Marianne, now living in a quaint little town in the south of France, found a new way to live. The small stone house that was hidden, surrounded by vineyards and lavender fields, a setting that brought a peace that she had not felt for a long time. Every day she got up. In the sun, he worked in the garden, and in the evening, he sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sky change color. She had distanced herself from the old life in Paris, including Jean-Pierre. The memories were still there, but over time, they became less painful, almost like scars that, although visible, no longer caused pain. Marianne found solace in her new simple routine, in the small joys of everyday life, and little by little she began to feel that she was really healing. But there was one thing that never left his mind: Pierre. He had been a brief but intense chapter in her life, and the guilt for his disappearance still haunted her. Sometimes she dreamed of him, saw him smiling, as if he was saying that everything was fine. She should move on. These dreams, though sad, also brought a strange comfort, as if he was still with her somehow. On a sunny afternoon, while walking along the deserted beach near her home, Marianne found a small message written on the sand, washed away by the waves. "Don't blame yourself anymore. Hurrah for me." She stopped, perplexed, looking at those words as if Pierre were speaking directly to her. Although we wished it could just be an order, we decided at that moment that it was time to finally leave the past behind. She said a prayer silently, thanking for all she had learned, and with the wind carrying her words to the sea, feeling free. Jean-Pierre, on the other hand, found refuge in an isolated monastery in the French Alps. The man who had once been full of self-confidence and ambition was now a shadow of what he had been. He spends his days in meditation and manual labor, trying to find some kind of inner peace. First, he felt as if he was running away, as if the monastery was a way to escape the consequences of his action. But as the months passed, he began to realize that he was, in fact, facing his demons head-on. While long hours of silence and introspection forced him to confront the darkest parts of himself, those that did led to destroying his own marriage and indirectly causing Pierre's death. There were nights when Jean-Pierre dreamed of the sea, dark sea that took Pierre away. He woke up sweating, his heart pounding, as if he was back on that deck, pushing Pierre to his death. But over time, these dreams began to change. He came to see Pierre in a different way, not as a victim of his anger, but as someone who forgave him, understood him. These night visions, although disturbing, aimed to bring an unexpected problem. One day, while working in the monastery garden, Jean-Pierre found a small blue flower growing among the stones, something he had never seen before. Seen before in that barren terrain, the monks said it was a symbol of hope and renewal. He took this as a sign that he was on the right track, that somehow Pierre had forgiven him, and that he, too, needed to learn to forgive himself. At the end of that year, Jean-Pierre made a decision. He knew that he could not spend the rest of his life hiding in the monastery. I needed to get back to the real world, face the people I had left behind, try to rebuild something of value. He said goodbye to the monks, thanking them for everything he had learned, and left, feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. A few months later, Marianne received a letter from Jean-Pierre. He had moved to a small village in Provence, where he was working as a volunteer at a community center. In the letter, he talked about how he had found a new one, with the purpose of helping others, in trying to somehow repair the harm he had caused. He didn't ask to rekindle the relationship, just wanted her to know that she was okay, and that he wished the same for her. Marianne read a letter with a sad but sincere smile. She felt an unexpected peace in knowing that Jean-Pierre was also finding his way. Although their paths had parted, there was a sense of closure. Despite everything, they had both survived and learned from the pain. That night, she sat on her porch, looking up at the stars, and for the first time in a long time, feeling that everything would be fine. Marianne knew the past would always be part of who she was, but now she was ready to look to the future with hope and courage. And so the story of Marianne and Jean-Pierre, marked by love, betrayal, tragedy, and finally redemption, found its denouement. Although the scars remained, they were now just a reminder that, despite everything, life goes on, and there is always a chance to start over. If you made it this far, I want to know your opinion. What do you think of Marianne and Jean-Pierre? Do you think they made the right choices? And what would you have done in their place? Leave your comment below. I will love reading and interacting with you. Do not forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next stories. Oh, and share it with your friends. They will also be interested, right? I'm waiting for your comment.